This is the Griffin Podcast, episode number 104. We're in our seller plan here, and we're talking about should you, if you're the seller, do your own seller inspection. Are you a home seller or home buyer who has questions about selling or buying residential property? Or maybe you're an agent who needs a plan to build a better business, but you can't seem to find an easy way to get your answers? Well, then, hey, you're definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of The Griffin and the host of the Ask-A-Griffin podcast. And to help you take immediate action to get started in the right direction, if you're a seller, a buyer, or an agent, you can take advantage of our free step-by-step guides that are waiting for you at griffincourses.com. That's Griffin courses.com. All right, let's get started in this episode. We're in our seller plan, one of our 3 core plans. And the question on the table is, should you do your own seller inspection? So the first point here is that the buyer's home inspector, okay, because this is what's going to happen in most of these cases, if not the majority by far. Some people will waive a home inspection or they'll put funky language in for informational purposes only, but they're going to kick the tires. Unless they're really desperate in a hot market, you have all the upper hand, and that's even dangerous. So the idea is that the buyer's home inspector who's coming to see your house and kick the tires has a very critical perspective. See, that has nothing to do emotionally with your property. It has more to do with the actual physicality of the property. And the home inspection business is a tough business because the responsibility and the liability that accrue to a buyer's home inspector is heavy. For example, what if that buyer home inspector misses a very critical item in that home inspection, so that post-closing, now the buyer has a big headache that's at a big expense that the buyer's home inspector did not find. So obviously, to cover their own tail and to satisfy their insurance needs, they're going to be protecting themselves. Think about what I'm saying. The buyer's home inspector is going to be doing as thorough a job as possible to satisfy their own protection, which not the least of which is their insurance company. So they have to do things by the book and very tightly by the book. So they're going to come in and be critical, and they're going to reveal things about that property that are not obvious to the casual buyer. Somebody that comes in and looks at the property, gets emotional about the location, the physicality, etc., the rooms, everything works, the lifestyle, but they're blind to what the property really is all about physically. So this home inspector comes in with a very long checklist and goes down the list, checking everything, all the major items, the minor items. And it can be downright scary for a buyer at the end of a home inspection to see all of the items that they're responsible for. So you want to understand that that's going to happen in the majority of cases when you go to sell your house. But the second point about a seller home inspection begins by saying this: you really don't know what you don't know about your own property. Now, I know the pushback comes from a lot of people that are intimately involved in their own property. Even a builder who builds their own property, they believe they know everything about it. That's their perspective because they were involved. And they may know a lot about it. But again, that's their perspective of what the physical property is. It's not the perspective of the home inspector who's representing the buyer. And quite frankly, we don't run around our house for the most part always doing perfect maintenance upgrades or really paying attention because we're busy. There are some occasions, I don't want to speak in absolutes here, where that does happen and somebody is right on top of their issues. I mean, it's wonderful when you get a home seller who is really right on top of all their maintenance and they're just spectacular at it. And it does make it very easy when the buyer's home inspector comes. But even in those cases, there's still an awareness that's brought up, maybe even about future maintenance, whatever it might be. So it's just safer to assume you don't know what you don't know about your own property. So that's why you want to go get a seller home inspection so that you get your own inventory of what your property is. I can think of very recently, my in-laws who live in a different state, I had recommended to them that they do a home inspection because they thought they knew a lot about their property from the perspective of the buyer, and they get emotionally attached, and they were very intimately involved in the building of it and the expansion of it and the improvement of it. But as an expert visiting the house many times, what I saw was a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance. And so instead of pointing it out, I simply referenced that they should get a seller home inspection, which they did. And there was a pretty big list of deferred maintenance, but there were a whole bunch of issues that they weren't aware of that would come up that were relatively inexpensive and easy to fix. So they did that. Furthermore, because it was all done, they were able to present that inspection to any potential buyer, say what they had done, and tell the buyers and the buyer's inspectors that the rest was going to be an as-is sale. So they could go and do their own inspection, but here's what theirs had revealed. And of course, barring something that their own inspector had missed that was egregiously wrong, if the buyer inspector found something that the home seller's inspector didn't find that was egregiously wrong, great, bring it up. Okay. But that's why we try to eliminate all that from happening. And that's really the key point here in this podcast. A seller home inspection helps you be out in front of repairs before they become issues. So let me explain this. A very common bone of contention during a home inspection is a water heater. Water heaters obviously contain water. And when you have water against piping, it rusts over time. So there is a limited life capacity to a water heater. So depending, you'll hear it argued all the time. Is it 8 years? Is it 12 years? Is it 10 years? Well, again, that has a lot to do with the environment around it. Is it a moist place? Does the pipe rust easily? Whatever it might be. Too many variables to discuss, but that's a perfect example. And so oftentimes we say, well, there's nothing wrong with my water heater. I've had it for 15 years and it's working well. Yeah, well, that's the point. These things are eventually going to go. So it becomes a bone of contention with the buyer's home inspector, who brings it up and says it's past its useful life. Well, when you hear that as a buyer, what are you thinking? You're going to buy it, and the next day there's going to be water all over the floor. So you're worried. Another big deal could be the roof. A roof is a scary thing. And again, if you're in a building, these things still apply because they apply. So for example, in our Boston market, they apply to the condo association, and that can be a big deal. We've had all sorts of issues with condo associations and their ability to stay on top of this. So by doing this seller inspection, you're just out in front of these issues before they become issues, because now you can fully disclose what your home inspection yielded yourself. And that brings a lot of good faith. And I think that's a really important thing here to recognize, is that buyers really appreciate maximum transparency. And it's just good business practice as well. It's really important to understand that, okay? So let me go back and say the subject here is inside of our seller plan. And the question is, should you do your own seller inspection of your own property? The answer is yes, but here are the key points. The buyer's home inspector has a very critical perspective, and they're going to come in and be critical about components of your property. Be ready for that. Don't be insulted. Be out in front of it. 2, you don't know what you don't know about your own property because you just don't live in the micro details of it every day. You live the lifestyle in it. And even if you're great at maintenance, you just don't see it through a buyer home inspector's lens or a home inspector in general. So pay for one yourself. Now you know what you don't know from a home inspector's perspective, and that's helpful. And the key point is, when you do the seller home inspection, get out in front of the repairs before they become issues during a negotiation or a sale. Do the ones that you can afford to. And if there are issues that you can't afford to deal with, have them priced out by a professional, adjust the price accordingly, or negotiate that as part of the final price. Very simple. Get a competent real estate agent to help you with that. Let me summarize it by saying, when a buyer makes an offer on your property, most of the time, they will include a home inspection. The purpose of that inspection is to identify any and all problems with the physical property. This is not an emotional attack. It's a look at your physical property. Therefore, it's best that you hire your own inspector to perform an inspection to identify any issues up front so that you can rectify the problems before they cost you a sale. All right, remember, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction if you're a seller, buyer, or agent who wants our help by getting a copy of our free step-by-step guides that are waiting for you at griffincourses.com. Also, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. We also post our content on YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe to the Griffin channel. We'd also appreciate it if you would share our content with home sellers and buyers and maybe other real estate agents that you know so that they all get the help that they need. But remember this, we sign off the same way every time. Nobody's coming for you, so take action and get to work on a plan for selling or buying property or a plan for becoming a successful real estate agent. And we can help you do that right here. We'll also see you in the next episode to help you keep going in this positive direction. Thanks for tuning in.